Welcome you all. This is the Chapter 1 video for CHD 208. Chapter 1, we're going to be talking about the effective leader. So let's first address who is the leader. Okay, the leader is the director, maybe the principal, the person who's in charge. Okay, so who are directors? Directors are people or administrators who acquire knowledge and skill in early childhood education and development, as well as business practices. Okay, so your effective leader or your director needs to be knowledgeable in early childhood and also business procedures, accounting, keeping up with how much money the place has, policies and procedures manuals, evaluating staff. So there's a lot of business practice things that go into being a director of an early childhood center or school, more than just educating children. Okay, so you got to be knowledgeable of all of those things. You've got to be knowledgeable in enrolling children, evaluating your staff, from budgeting and taking inventory, and from maintaining your physical plant, like maintaining your building, to bandaging up a child's scraped knee that might get hurt at school. So the director is ultimately the person in charge, the effective leader. And the word effective is so important in this chapter because anybody can just be a director or a leader, administrator in title. But to be effective, you've got to be able to do all those things that we just mentioned. And you know, sometimes in some centers, the director doesn't only do those things we just mentioned, but they're also a teacher. So they have to teach children as well as maintain all of that I just mentioned before. So a director's job is so encompassing. They need to make sure that they keep up with the currently enrolled children. They also need to be aware of their prospective student list, meaning let's say a student moves out of your 3-year-old classroom in the middle of the year. Well, you need to have a prospective student list so that you can maintain your enrollment, because in maintaining enrollment means money for your center, because people have to pay to come there, because you have to pay your staff and your light bill and your food costs if you serve food. So there's so many things. So that enrollment is what pays the bills, basically. Okay, so one person moves in, you need to be moving another person in. So maintaining that prospective student list and actually getting out there and marketing your center so that you have a prospective student list is so important. The effective leader or the director is also responsible for all staff members, from the teachers to the people who come in, the janitorial staff. If you offer food, the people that cook the meals. If you have somebody that buses children, like goes and picks up students from a school and brings them back, those people, you are responsible for them all. If your center is governed by a board of directors, then you're responsible for making sure the board is up to date on what's happening. The funders, the people who are giving money possibly to the school, licensing agencies, like within the state of Alabama, you need to be responsible for the Alabama Department of Human Resources manual, knowing their policies and how that governs your center as a licensed daycare, and also the visits that are going to be happening with that DHR comes in. You need to be aware of who your community support groups are, and so that they can offer you assistance throughout the year. So there's so many things that effective leader must take into consideration. Another thing that the effective leader has to make sure that they're aware of is NAEYC, right? Because if you are a licensed center, then you got to be doing a lot of things correctly according to the way in Alabama, the Alabama Department of Human Resources says, but you also want to make sure that you're implementing those developmentally appropriate things that NAEYC stands for. So NAEYC says the most important things that we can do is to make sure that we help children develop in all four of those domains, the physical, cognitive, social, and emotional domain, okay? And that we do that by using a developmentally appropriate curriculum. And then also the second thing we need to make sure that NAYC says is so important is that we encourage learners through active involvement in an encouraging, responsive environment. So the leader ultimately is responsible for making sure that we're carrying out that responsive, encouraging environment, and that the lesson plans and the curriculum we use, the what we teach and how we teach it, goes into that developmentally appropriate piece. Okay, so I'm going through your chapter, and I'm on page 4 and 5, and I'm looking at section 1.4 about administrative styles and roles. Now, your style of leadership and the way you guide your people that work along with you at the center is so important. I served as a building principal for 3 years, and I think you have to really take a look at how you want to manage people. Your style of leadership is so important. I am of the opinion that the most effective style is one who takes it from a team approach. Okay, does the director who doesn't see themselves as kind of sitting up in the glass ceiling and barking out the orders. I always tried to think that you should lead by example. So you should never be, I think the most effective way of doing it is to never ask the people that work with you to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. Trash needs to be taken out. The janitor's busy. The teachers are teaching. You may need to pick the trash up, because if the teachers see you doing that, then they're going to be much more likely to do it themselves if they see the director doing it. Does that make any sense? I hope so, because that is that team approach, that lead by doing style. Also, you need to be a mentor. If you want the curriculum in your school to be that developmentally appropriate, where in those responsive, encouraging environments, then you need to be active in your school, in and out of those classrooms, so that the teachers know that you're aware of what's happening. That's ultimately your responsibility. So those interpersonal skills, the ability to communicate with others and be like a staff-oriented director who is very much in touch with what's happening in their building is so important. Now, I'm going to jump over to page 9 in your textbook about serving as a curriculum leader. So who is the curriculum leader? Well, first of all, let's decide what is curriculum. So curriculum is what you teach and how you teach it. So who's the leader of that? It's the director. The director is the most important responsibility, is being that curriculum leader. And if you are working, or you are a daycare owner, a child care center owner, and you hire a director who's not very knowledgeable in early childhood education, you need to get them knowledgeable. They need to be taking some courses, becoming familiar with all these policies and procedures that go along with early childhood education, because it's very hard to be a curriculum leader if you don't know what you're talking, if you don't know how children learn, how early childhood children learn, how early childhood age children learn. Okay, so, and also, just because you're knowledgeable and you've learned it 15 years ago doesn't mean that you don't need to keep yourself current. And if the director keeps him or herself current, then they're going to need to encourage their student excuse me, encourage their staff members to do the same. Okay, so we need to make sure that we continue to develop our skills there. Okay. So the director is responsible for instituting and maintaining high quality curriculum. Okay, that is the director's job. Instituting and maintaining high quality curriculum. So what we're saying is they're the curriculum leader for high quality curriculum. So what is high quality curriculum? Well, it is one where children are actively engaged in learning through play and meaningful experiences. Okay, that take into all four of those domains, like we said back earlier with NAEYC, and that they're doing it in that kind of environment. In order to ensure that you have a high quality curriculum, your teachers, your staff must be highly trained themselves, right? Or they need to be knowledgeable. So it's the director has to assume that responsibility for making sure that the staff is properly trained to develop lesson plans for their classrooms. So if you are asking your staff to do something and you notice as the director that they might not have the skill set to do that, then it's your responsibility to bring someone into the center to help them, or you're their mentor. So it's going to be your job to ensure that it gets done. And in order to do that, that comes into place where we were saying that the director must have those good interpersonal skills where they can communicate, they can motivate, and they can get along well with others. Because if you're a motivator or you're a person who can communicate well, when you're asking your teachers to learn a new skill set or to become familiar with doing something else, then they're more likely to do it because of the way through your because of your motivation. Okay, now you can be a director who has that lead by example, have wonderful have wonderful interpersonal skills where you get along well with all of your staff, and you're working to make sure, because you're staff oriented, and so you're in and out of those classrooms and you're kind of keeping your thumb on things so you know what's happening. But there's always going to come a time when people don't get along, because we are just human, and that's just the way it works. And people are going to have a conflict with possibly the other people that are employed there. So what are you going to do? It's your job to, number one, be aware that there's a conflict happening in your school, but to also help if the teachers can't, like if it's just brewing and it's festering up and it's making the workplace coming over into and actually impacting the jobs they're doing, then you've got to get involved in it. And you can't get all messy and get down in there and and who he said, she said. That's not your job. Your job is to figure out what the problem is and then help these people come up with a way that they're going to resolve their issues. Okay, so being a person who's effective at conflict resolution, and none of us like conflict. Okay, it's just typically nobody likes to get in the middle of people who are but that is something as the effective leader that you have to do. So you practice conflict resolution, which basically means that you would bring the two people together and get to the root of the problem. What is causing the problem? And then once you figured out what's causing the problem, then you're going to come up with a solution. How are we going to fix the problem? So let's sit right here and let's figure it out. And then the third step to that is, and I think this is a piece that a lot of people miss, is they get to the root of the problem and they come up with a plan or a solution to solve the problem, but then they don't ever follow through with it. Like they don't go back and follow up and make sure that it's not festering back up again. Okay, and that we're actually using those policies or those solutions that we came up with, so that the problem doesn't happen again. So remember that piece of being the leader is, and if you're a person that doesn't like conflict, then being, sometimes you have to look at it. I hate conflict. It was one of the things that from being a principal that I despised the most. And I found myself not that everybody bickered and all of that, but not only are you talking about conflict with people that work in the center, but maybe a conflict with parents, conflicts among children. I mean, it just goes on and on. And so it's one of the things that I disliked the most about being an administrator is that I felt like I spent a lot of time in maybe not necessarily always in conflict resolution, because that would not be a fair assessment, but I spent a lot of time in the other pieces of being an administrator, and not so much that curriculum part, which was the part I loved. So it's what ultimately made me leave. And because I like working directly with teachers in curriculum and with children. And so I felt like my time was a lot of time pulled away with developing policies and procedures and budgeting and, you know, the innards kind of the school, like from the finance part of it. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about the management of the school. Not just the curriculum, but the management part. As the administrator or the director, you have very limited time and a lot to get done. So being organized and how you approach things is so important. And one of the things that can help you be very organized is having some management tools. How are we going to do it? The first thing that every child care facility, every school should have is a policies and procedures manual. And a policies and procedures manual lays out how we're going to do things, okay? So that it ensures that you do, when something comes up, you do it the same way every time, regardless of the situation and regardless of who's involved. And that's the biggest piece. It's just like being a teacher. And if little Sally misbehaves and then little Johnny misbehaves, you got to handle it in the exact same way. Regardless of the day, the time, who it is, it's always handled the same way in a sense of the procedure or the policy in your classroom. Okay, so it's no different than the way you manage children. It's just managing the whole program. Okay, so policies and procedures manual. So what is a policy? First of all, a policy is a course of action that guides future decisions. It tells you what you're going to do when certain things arise. Okay, how we're going to do what it's a course of action. Procedures are the steps to get to that policy, okay, to implement the policy. How are we going to implement the policy or the procedures? Now, a lot of times, if your school or your center is governed by a board of directors, then they kind of come up with the policies and they ask the administrator to come up with the procedures. So be careful when you are implementing procedures that you don't write very detailed procedures for things that can be so easy. Because when you do that, and your book has a little part about this, but I completely agree, is that people begin to dismiss the policies or procedures because you're making something that's so easy, so hard. Okay, so if it's an easy thing to do, just put it down there easy and move on, because there's going to be some policy that's going to be a little bit harder, that's going to need a little bit more detailed procedure, and you're going to need people to be listening to it. Okay, so what's in the policies and procedures manual? What should it cover? Well, it's going to need information about your program. It's going to need about how you're going to operate your program, such as your enrollment process. How are you going to enroll students? You're just going to let them come up in there in a free fall and enroll, or you're going to have, we got to have your blue slip. We got to have an enrollment application so that we know who to contact. I mean, like, what are you going to require? Okay. Materials acquisitions, meaning if I'm a teacher and I need some material, I need a procedure on that and a policy about how do I go about getting the materials that I need. Do I just go to Walmart and buy it and bring the receipt back and you give me my money back? Probably not. There needs to be it's called a purchase order. You can't have everybody running out and spending up money that the center doesn't have, or it's not budgeted. So there has to be a, that's a big piece of a policies and procedures manual is how you're going to get those materials. Bylaws govern your school. They tell you how you're going to operate. Job descriptions. If you hire me as a teacher, I need to know what you're expecting of me as the teacher. Okay. What all's involved in me working for you in your center. The philosophy, if you want me to plan effective lessons, I need to know what the philosophy of the center is. So that's another piece that needs to be in the policies and procedures manual. And then last, but certainly not least, funding. How do we get our money? Okay. So that, so meaning like for paying tuition, every month, every week, whatever it is that happens in your center, there needs to be a policy for that. So that basically is the highlights of chapter 1. And but please make sure you go through Blackboard and you look at all the supplementary materials that are included there, the PowerPoint, read through your textbook before you take the quiz.